and say welcome and to the moment when we are diving into the potluck, the first topic, which we'll give to Martin, or the first dish to be digested. The table is yours.
Yeah. Also, but like, I mean, we had this residency week together in Pioneer, and there was when we focused on the cards, particularly working these, between 4, 5, 6 days on fleshing out the concept and producing several of them. We had, what did we have in the end? 112 or something, I think, when we got out of there. And I think it was very much in the idea of, well, both maybe knowing a bit what is meant when we speak about them, how they, like, what would be an internal structure, finding out about how we think about them as a what kind of functioning they would kind of bring with themselves, properties of theirs, and yeah, and then we went, like, explored their meaning in doing by their meaning, their making, I mean, in doing by like some more kind of dedicated sessions for forming them, but then we recorded a lot also kind of on the go, things that we kind of found were popped out. We just made a card of them. So there was kind of very kind of heterogeneous ways in which there was a record created of that of that week in cards and about the cards. And beyond this was the thought that, like, this could become or by way of this there could be an interface created between what we've been working with for the last year, 1.5 years or so, that could kind of function as an invitation, as a kind of a portal to get in communication with this group for other groups. And so there was also discussed certain ways of kind of making this, giving this a kind of publishable form. And there were certain kind of, like, also technical discussions going on at the time. And so this is now a first kind of stone cast into pretty much any direction, like a void, to see, like, what type of materialization would make sense and what type of cooperative techniques, like, for working together on creating these, or spinning further, forking, and establish. So this is, like, extremely basic, because I'm not a coder by any training. So this is all, like, dilettantism at its best. But so, like, this, what you, if you're seeing my screen, what you're looking at is basically a hand-coded PHP and bit of JavaScript and bit of and then of course HTML framework and CSS around it, that draws on so to speak a database that lies on GitHub, because the idea was mainly, like, how do we get to a point where we would work together, we would be able to work together. So this is what the GitHub repo looks like. And here's kind of a bit of like a how-to on to get into constructing these cards, which is done in this file. So basically that's what the render draws on, in a randomized way. There's a cutoff point, so there's kind of ways in which you can just store cards that you just came up with, to, you know, and even kind of do some kind of work in process stuff down here that will never show up. The renderer would just disregard the file following that cutoff point. And then there's a bit of a formal syntax now that makes these entries readable for the renderer to digest and output a card in this random way. And this includes also images that can be added to the thing, and that works so that here's an image folder also on the repo, and you can just drop whatever image you want there to be in the background of a card, and it will render it as soon as it's referenced. As soon as it's referenced as an image property here in the card, like this. And then, like, some part, this is also just, you know, a bit kind of thinking visually. And obviously, you do see a rather classic proportion laying here in the back. There were also moments in which I did not have that. It was basically just outputting the text into the screen, which was also in a way funny. And I think that these are all things to take into consideration, because maybe it's, yeah. But I added it because it makes clear that there's a limit to the thing, and you know, it makes it kind of in an idea maybe of like digital haptics. It makes it maybe approachable for, yeah, I could possibly do some, for the thought of possibly be able like to do some replacement or displacement of this type of thing. I'm trying to find some with images now. This is because like I put the cutoff point rather high. Let's see. This here is, for example, one that came out of one of the last play sessions we had. So you have like a title here, you have a description of the card. Some really go with kind of how to do it. This is pretty much a how-to thing. And then I built in already this kind of possibility of having a suit that it would kind of cross-link to others. Obviously, this renderer right now outputs one card at random. So like not much kind of composition to be done with this. But so, yeah, so, and I think I have to say for myself that this was an approach, if I may maybe conclude on this introduction. I hope I showed, because I mean, there's not so much to show. You've seen what is there, but I went into this, I guess, with somewhat of a divided mode, or like feeling about it in a way, because I both thought that there was the kind of ambition to create create, I guess is the word, a type of like an interface on this group, that this group creates a type of interface with which possibly to interface to other groups. That was one of the things that we wanted to be doing when we were in Palmio. But then also like being both sensitive about the question of like how this materialization always like kind of can be exclusive in a way to other ways of materializing it, and also like particularly in ways in which to participate in that materialization. Like, I mean, now we have digital with I would guess a rather low threshold way of kind of going in there, but it still comes across as it is still a thing that presents itself. So like that it has a certain in German you say Verdrängung. What is it when an object displacement? So it displaces maybe other options, and this is why I think it's good to talk about this. So this would maybe be the first part of this. The second part, I think I want to just like push that right after, because maybe it can make sense in discussing this further. in the sessions we've had since this kind of process started, we've been very much kind of going through differently arranged processes of how to generate these cards. And there was certain rules or set in, what to do: titling, framing, throwing a sept was one of the things, and that has worked. I think that there's an agreement about that. That has worked rather okay. And then kind of in connection with me as a kind of proposition to us, I hope this is a kind of, when I speak about these things, this is kind of an us type of thing, because I don't think it should be an individual kind of effort. And then in connection with the conversations that we've had with Pekko after the sessions about making a playtest that would kind of incorporate some of the existing cards, has come up for me, and this is not in this part too, the question whether or what position, what kind of significance in this whole undertaking the cards play that are created, that have been created. Because, and to kind of give my views on this, certainly we can look at them as products, and so cards that can be used as cards. So I have a thinking problem, I have an organizational problem, or I want to explore a certain thing, or I want to kind of, play for shits and giggles with my friends, and I know about the XORG cards for some reason, and I take them in whatever way that would then happen, and kind of, so to say, apply them or employ them. That would be a rather known way of dealing with cards, and it would be looking at the thing from the kind of from the product side, so to speak, from the thing side. But what I now came to think about is that the way that we've been using them is basically to use them as a background, help me with the right wording, as a setting, or as a framework, as a situation, but also as a kind of projection screen for the practice of generating them. So in a sense that the cards present themselves as a, so to speak, almost like a Fata Morgana in the back, whose purpose is that you go through the motion of creating them, of generating them together. And once that is done, they have basically fulfilled their purpose. And so this is a bit what I think is really curious to discuss. I think there's a lot. I mean, we spoke earlier about the method, the technique of the excuse. I think I brought that in at a point, I guess, no, where you set up a certain. It's a kind of a straw man thing. So you set up a certain thing, not without reason, and also not without specificity, of course, in order to kind of enable a thing kind of prior to it. And when you arrived, the thing that you were actually after has already been done. So I think that would be something that I would be very interested in, hearing the thoughts of this group about, and in the YouTube comments, I guess. Yeah, how do we see this? I think it's an interesting question.
I intentionally will not go first because I talk too much anyway. I have things I definitely want to take into the process, but I have also qualms about starting first. So anybody else first comments?
Yeah, well, yeah, this is kind of all new to me, but like I really appreciate the way you framed it, Martin, and also these last words or the framings of the cards that you used. I think, yeah, half the time, like it's like trying to name this weird mess with which we're operating here in some respects. And yeah, the Fata Morgana kind of example and visually also, I think that fulfills that purpose. Yeah, and generally I'm also very much interested in this kind of prompt for a cogeneration type thing. I don't know. For now, that, and let's discuss.
I think, I mean, obviously we discussed a lot about it in Pamion, and thanks a lot as well for them bringing it to some sort of online space, because then, of course, we were full of papers and writings, but then there was a massive work in then bringing it to this. And it looks really nice. And I think, at the beginning you did sort of as well, sort of like a very card-like aesthetic. But I like this sort of symbolism. Oh, wait, someone is calling me. Everything's gonna ring now. This sort of symbolism with this sort of elements as well. And I think it's super cool. I mean, we discussed as well potentially having maybe as well, because of course, as you see them on the phone and you refresh, you then have sort of randomized cards. The idea of also seeing the deck somehow. The full deck would be interesting. I don't know how would that look like. And of course, also recognize there's still a massive amount of work to do in terms of us as well, chipping into the sort of definitions or the descriptions that we've been sort of starting to write and develop whilst in Paimio. But I think this looks brilliant to me. And I like that it's less card-like as in the aspect of the cards as it was. Not that I didn't like that, I thought that was also cool, but this I think is a step further, and there's a bit more of the interactive aspect that we were discussing as well, the imagery, the definition, these symbols as well. So I think it's really cool. And of course as well, where would they reside? That's also as well another question. Of course, we were discussing sort of like a domain, an XORG dot something. Yeah, that's also sort of like a question. But I think this is a great work. It's great to see them finally on a computer, and not just the sort of the cards that we were making analog.
I'm just trying, like, thanks both Rock and, did Rock just drop out? No, Jakob just took his real estate in my list.
Yes.
Thanks Rock and Linda for these. To be very sure, like I can fall into visual attention very easily, and it is also one of my, I do enjoy that, but I think it's very, for me at this point, it's very kind of, it feels very pressing kind of to think of it while not thinking of it, because I think there's like, it's not at the state where that makes really sense, and the problem with it is of course that it does kind of press itself in rather much, proposing to make sense and displacing other ways of making sense. So that's how I look at that. But I think maybe trying to kind of give access to these sort of things. I'm just trying to do one thing very quickly on that visual side, is to take away to deactivate the please move this window away from the shared application. Do you see anything at this moment what I'm doing here? Let me just see what I can.
No, there's just a gray. And by the way, hello Leo as well, and welcome back, Jakub.
Oh,
hi.
Yeah. Oh, hi Leo.
Hey.
But this is getting embarrassing.
Welcome to the Potluck.
Here's people who really do coding. Like I'm just like going through my your professional is present. I would just try to kind of get all the styling out. But you can just, this is nothing too kind of or have any but Pekka, did you want to add some thoughts?
A kind of comment that goes like two directions. It's like a bifurcating comment. Is like okay, so in a way, like we had this pathway of like starting from this courier structure that is in the card, which was kind of like before we had this sessions in Finland. That there's actually it's like a knot point that has a lot of structuring in it, and it's actually structurally rather complex. In some ways, much more complex than many like lofty concepts that we have, the structural concepts even. And then we went to kind of testing out, experimenting with it, and had actually very interesting tests in that. So that's a sort of like, now we're following like a early road, and now we're coming to this bifurcation. So through the playtests, also afterwards, I come more and more to think about it as like, as we think of a word or even a concept, that is, what is the media form and presence or surface of a concept? It's not any particular thing. Like the concept can be recalled by somebody talking, it can be recalled by its writing, but somebody can maybe even figure that out, like looking at a painting and say, oh, this is this concept for me. So there is this sort of like, it's not even a chameleon, it's kind of like that it's utilizing surfaces, but it's none of those surfaces per se. It's rather something that it's almost like a creature behind the sea, but it sometimes appears on different surfaces, kind of thing. And then, and of course, I'm making this comparison because I do think the card, or the card in quotation marks, is kind of similar. That what it's kind of looking at is like, what if a card would be, there's not really a word for it, but kind of behavior similar than a concept is. We don't really have parallel structures to concepts. I mean, it's a long discussion whether we do. Let's not open that, but it's maybe a wacky thought, but I think it's actually maybe in some way fertile. So, but that's kind of the one side of the road. The other side of the road is, or the other road, is that if it doesn't have a particular surface, it also like breeds from surfaces. That it
does what?
It breeds from surfaces. It takes its life on surfaces, like just like the concept does. Like it can be any surface, but on the other hand, it's dependent on appearing in different forms and things to have its own life.
Yeah.
And so in this sense, it's very kind of like friendly towards having surfaces, but none of the surfaces is it. so to speak. And I do think this is something of a background thought, which is also reflective of the playtests of the last few weeks. To me, I might be wrong, but that's kind of like a thing we are playing with. That we are giving it surfaces, and that is in itself fertile. But they always come with the sense that the surfaces are necessary or useful, but also none of the surfaces is the thing in itself, and that's also kind of like related to its kind of possibility of creation, how they can always be generated, but then also there is a value towards kind of almost saving them, that something stays and remains. But that's a whole nother topic. But that's what I wanted to open into the conversation about these cards.
Yeah. I think that makes like a lot of sense with not equating any one manner of appearance with the thing itself. It's, I guess, this may be a designer's issue here also, but like when you then get into, I mean, in some way, then those surfaces obviously also kind of, they do feedback on the concept. The concept is not
very much
like
so,
the concept is not just using surfaces to
it's
present
breeding
itself through, but maybe that's but the surfaces itself. It's a funny way to use the term surface, because I think that's like maybe that suggests a certain shallowness of whatever that medium, you know, then occurs to be in a given moment.
I don't actually mean the shallowness.
No, I know that's why I may be marking this, like, but it's like, I'm just saying, like, to use the term or the concept here then of the surface, it does kind of somewhat kind of evoke this old dichotomy between something which is deep, that would be the concept, so to speak, itself, whether something that is comparably or relatively shallow, which would be the surface through which it expresses itself. And I think, I mean, the same way as we've been now kind of infusing the cards through our speaking by way of, you know, however we now want to call it, this kind of alloy of surfaces that is this moment, the same kind of thickness. I mean, in terms, you can even like go and trace through like the decisions that need to be made, and which are the reason why I'm happy that we're now beginning talking about it. So the same way that then this like any attempt of materializing the kind of evolvement in other media feed and stomp back on what the concept is, or they make the concept in a sense. I mean, we have generated the concept, whatever we want to call this kind of cards thing now.
I would say precisely the interesting thing is that, I mean, one can make it a concept, certainly. Like, concepts have this dominance that they eat everything. But one can take the alternate path of kind of challenging that actually might be different than a concept, which is unusual because we usually just give everything to concepts. But I do think there's a poverty to this practice.
if I may, could someone just describe real quick, like, what is the structure of what's going on? I came here for another meeting and I ended up at this own thing, so I'm like, okay, I gotta.
So it's an XORG potluck, which is like people bring topics, and we process those topics. We are currently in the topic of certain implementation of cards, and that's the situation you find yourself.
Okay, well, awesome. Please go on.
Yeah. So this concept, it's the kind of convention that you should, and I intentionally say should, like you should culturally straitjacket that you should make it thing into a concept. But I do think that's a structure of poverty in some ways. I mean, this is a whole other kind of worms in itself. But to maybe practicalize this a bit. So first of all, like the surfaces, I don't take it that as a negative. You could also think of it as interface. But generally, the life of anything that even lives, say, under the surface, is dependent on appearing on those surfaces, like including concepts. Like actually that they have expressions is the way that the concept lives, but then it is built in a manner or composed in a manner in all of us, in that it's not quite any of those surfaces, but it's some kind of collation that has its, in a way, almost its own life. It's almost like,
I mean, we could just use the term material or materialization for this, because that would both suggest the kind of, so to speak, exteriorly observable plus the thickness of its making.
Yeah, that's like materialization is good. But okay, that's one side of it. But then the second question being like, okay, if the card, if one kind of allows for the play that it could be kind of like a different alternate structure in a kind of parallel family with concepts, how would it be different? And that then opens up this sort of, first of all, there are all these structural possibilities, like it's inherently game-like in the sense that it can belong to a deck or a suit, but these are kind of like just traits of certain kind. But it has this sort of like almost like hook points to a system built in, like so it's not just loosely associating, but it can actually kind of form a whole system around it, and that in itself is an interesting quality that for me is like interesting to play with in itself. But then secondly, it has this inherent relation, like a strong operational nature of framing, that and this has been kind of part of the play a lot, like in Finland, after Finland, etc. Is this sort of like a, well, it behaves like almost like a portal, a gate, but which is a frame-like thing, but also like in other ways that it's yeah, this is getting hard in terms of like it gets really into the weeds, but like the key thing is like concept has this sort of like maybe in illusion or facade, but this sense of kind of essentialism. Maybe there is no essence, most likely there isn't, but like there's still the wish of like, what is this concept, kind of a thing. But if you're based on a frame, it's a different take. And I know I'm taking it into rather esoteric realms, but I do think that in itself is actually a rather useful possibility of thinking about the tools that we use to process, which of course concept is one. But if we have a tool that we use to process that is inherently frame-like rather than essence-like, in addition having these latchings or potential hooks towards systems, all of those are interesting possibilities in and of themselves. And I'm sorry for the esotericness of this direction,
but it was not. Yeah. No.
Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's cool. It's like the card is like instead of having its essence is a fracture in, essentialism of the
Yeah,
thing itself. It's a
yeah,
cleft. Its
yeah.
essence is a cleft.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's why it's a portal-like also, like, yeah,
that too. Yeah.
you know, um, and that is interesting, and in some ways, I'll be short with this, but in some ways we have seen this in action, or discovered even this in action, like not expecting it, or not like actively trying to push for it, that this sort of portal-likeness, that it always kind of works like a wormhole, like it jumps you somewhere else, happens without pushing it. And that might be a reflection of this quality, might be.
Leo, very quickly, that I understood you well here. You said cleft. Is that C-L-E-F-T? Is that the word you meant to say?
I think it has a K, but I'm not sure. It's like the
cleft
Finnish word for that.
K? Okay, but it's kind of what you mean is the kind of
Yes, the rift, like
the rift,
Yes.
the chasm, the gap.
Yeah.
Yeah, the gap
Also-
in reality, the gap in the thing itself. Yeah.
Yeah, and also this is related to, which Martin might know. We have had discussions with Leo. Is the the Finnish concept of lovi, which you might have encountered or not.
Lovi.
Lovi. It's the basis of Finnish shamanistic magic. If you go to reading of it, and that it's always based on this sort of like being able to go through a cleft, a lovi, and even falling into a cleft, kind of a practice, which is like the mastery of reality is finding the cracks to go through it, kind of a way.
Yeah, I mean, so I just added today, I guess, the card by the name Gap. And I guess now with that word, Leo, it should be named Cleft. And
I like gap too, or rift, I like either of these things. Yeah.
I mean, cleft is the thing that kind of describes the act of getting apart, and gap is a kind of almost measurable kind of thing.
Oh, I like that distinction you're making. Then yeah, I guess cleft would be more accurate than gap, because I've been using gaps before I met Pekko, talking about clefts and stuff.
I mean, gap is the thing you find, but cleft is the kind of, the moment of it becoming that first, right?
Really? Interesting.
Sort of, yeah, I would agree.
And I mean, that's that's clearly a property that we've been having in view from the beginning of dealing with this idea, or like thinking about what are quote unquote cards.
Yeah.
And I think that has, I think, remained as one of the most potent characteristics of the whole thing. And I think I like very much, Pekka, the way that you kind of like, metaphysically upscale, or metaphysically, I don't know, but kind of philosophically upscale the thing anyway. But I think that's what we've basically been talking about since beginning with that as a structure. The thing that I think is kind of coming into view now is that it's kind of almost like a slider between thinking card as card. We have seen these cards. There's a thing on the top, there is a thing like a picture, then there's certain things written, and there's other kind of cross links to other things. It's very like, it's a kind of archetype object almost. And then on the other end of that slider, you have, it could choose now different ones, but like, let's say then the cleft or the gap as, yeah, well, Leo, you said it, I'm not going to say it myself, but like as a kind of, I'm quoting here now, like the essence of that. And so what I'm saying, what I mean by the slider is that I think we've been using, or we've been kind of a bit going back and forth maybe on that rope of leaning on these very specific ways in which cards also visually and like conceptually are structured in order to get to a point where we maybe then are now, like moving around. And now when you bring in the concept and we go in this kind of, you know, in this direction, that it kind of could be an alternative to concept. What I think is curious is this kind of each of these structures that we've kind of applied or worked through now, be that now the title, or be that lore or how to, or so, they have basically chopped away from this, as we've been saying, as has been said in this round, like the poverty of riches type of issue, narrowing the path of our like thinking to a point where we have been mobilizing the cards to what they have become, at least until now. So this, I think, is maybe what's kind of in motion right now. How much of that specificity, like borrowed specificity, is going to, just wanted to say be needed. Not sure that is that way that I want to express this, but like is going to feature now in this, or like what other types of specificity. But there was another way I will now stop and think about, because there was another way that I wanted to kind of attach this to the to other materializations. But I will now shut up for a second.
Yeah, that's kind of like, after all this chewing on the meta serpent, and I don't know what saying means. If you want to ask, I don't know, but like I certainly am guilty of kind of chewing on the meta serpent, like this sort of serpentine, twisty path that is in itself meta. To kind of hone down a bit, is that I'm kind of thinking that there is a kind of a best of both worlds situation with this materialization. If the materialization precisely is not the materialization, but rather like the concept, it can take a form, but that form is never the exhaustion of it. And which is true of concepts also. Like it's merely the use. It appears in some place, but just like a person. And there's a lot of actually overlap in this, how we approach persons and how we approach concepts. It's like if a person appears, say, let's say in a play, and they like, oh, that's this and that actor. We don't say like try to think like, what is that one thing that is that person, and is that moment the person itself? No, it's actually something that contributes to this whole, which cannot be put on any surface or any materialization, but actually kind of exist in or behind all of them, and has to be built behind all of them, because it's kind of like a complex behavioral operator, agent, that is showing certain sides of itself in these forms, but it's never one of the forms in itself. So maybe this is true of the cards. It's like this can give certain freedom to materialize them, even in say a shitty piece of paper, and say, okay, this is the card, or this is a card of that card. Yet at the same time, somebody else doing another materialization for it, and it's also the card, kind of an approach. So like there is a certain freedom in that it's both allowing to restrict, that is to materialize something, and while not being shackled into that restriction that you created.
Yeah, I think one thing that like might be interesting here is that, I mean, we keep coming back to like concept, and so I'm like, yo, that's really awesome, you know. And I don't know if you guys remember, like we were talking about like oxels and like how it's like, you know, concept and all of that stuff.
Yes.
And now I'm looking at these and we're like, okay, well now these cards are like a frame whose like essence is that of like being a cleft or something, or showing a way to a cleft or something. And so like this for me is like screaming Zizek, you know, but also like it's nice because the way the card, like as an interface, it tells you that it is a frame anyway.
Yeah.
So it like avoids the possibility of like you know, fetishizing the card as like a frame, or like as a concept, as a frame. So it's like,
That's an
I mean,
essence.
I find that super interesting how it's like you transcend the fantasy, right, of like, yeah, and within the mode medium of employment, which is the card, like it's a certain way to access the cleft that makes you know that the cleft is not eternal.
Yeah, I like, just a short comment on that, like in relation to Oxel, I kind of see both as kind of this mutant brothers of concepts, like which we normally wouldn't give life to, but would put under the domain of the king concept, emperor concept, and kind of try to turn all their behavior into that manner. But I do think there is richness to actually stop that dominance and kind of try to give this sort of minor forms some life of their own. And like you said, I kind of like the way you put it about the frame, Leo. In Oxel, we put different things. We're emphasizing different qualities, but it's merely pointing out that if you take that kind of form, if you take a card, you get certain configurations, you get certain emphasis, and it takes you into a different place. If you take an Oxel, it gets certain emphasis, and it takes you into yet another place. And that's for me interesting to support, rather than try to suppress it into like conceptual behavior.
Hell yeah.
But that's my that's also for me, this is my roundabout way of showing also support towards Martin, your endeavor of materializing the cards in one form, and kind of finding that materialization and the process that particular materialization comes with.
I think, and here's a bit of an issue that I have with this thing, is that this is it's kind of a funny moment that we have this discussion, this particular discussion today, about the materialization not being kind of exhaustive, you know, to the possibilities of materialization. But that comes up at a moment when a first materialization has been attempted. So while that was all in the spirit of, you know, basically throwing a first, you know, shot in a way, we're already, and of course that happens also with me. I'm doing this and I'm looking at colors and I'm looking, you know, so we're already kind of assessing as a thing in a moment where this was kind of my attempt after, because we've been trying to get a bit together about like maybe even coding together, or like it kind of coding came into the domain because then we departed after the finish moment where we had been doing everything on paper. So it was a kind of like, how can we kind of keep this up? And then we didn't get around to kind of joint sessions of coding. So at some point I was like, okay, I'm just going to try and, you know, I got a bit fascinated with also trying to kind of set this together. I said, okay, I'm going to set this together and throw it out. And now a thing became, and it already kind of wishes and has already manifested itself in that way of being the thing, because like evidenced by the fact that we're having this discussion that it is not. So like, and I think that's the question where I'm at, that I asked in the very beginning. And maybe now we found a way to kind of talk about it. what are these cards kind of for, in a sense, or like what? So that's the same question as like, what are they, without falling into the is trap?
Yeah, actually, that is a good way of putting it. And here's my take on it. Like, if one thinks, like, if we put the is game on the side, it always happens, and it happens even when we talk because it's kind of coded into us. But nevertheless, like, if you try to put it on the side, what is the role of materialization? Well, it's like any other role. Like, then the question of the materialization is like, what does the materialization serve, or what is that materialization able to bring into the process? It's a contributor to the process in itself. Like, and this is true for really even traditional things, like somebody materializes a book, writing the book out of their thoughts. Well, there is always the thought of what does that materialization serve. It might be serving their glory, or it might, well, that usually they have multiple topics. Among them might be to be able to have a persistent radiating opinion that keeps on kind of influencing more and more people, because the book is there in the world, to have an influence through that way. But that's looking materialization not as is, like this is a thing, but rather looking at it as an active operation. And I do think
Yes.
like looking at like that is a very sensible thing. Like, is like, okay, then the question also here is like, what kinds of things we can make these materializations serve?
I mean, sorry, I'm not just kind of, I want to kind of add to what you're just saying. This right now, what we're doing right here is, of course, also a materialization
Yeah,
of the cards.
yeah,
So
yeah.
this is kind of the additive to, or like what I earlier showed on screen is the additive what we're doing here now. So
yeah, yes.
yeah.
I think what you're saying is really interesting in regards to like what you were saying is like, oh, even when we're talking about here, like the point of the cards itself is that it is like not exhaustive, and like that's like what the cards themselves are showing, and that even as a method, like as a frame, you know, that's one of like many possible ones, right? Because it is like, if it comes down to being a mode of like an equipment that allows us to like open clefs, right, and to do so in a way that we recognize the equipment as being non-exhaustive, right, then I think, yeah, it's a total priority, you know, because it's like, that sounds like really awesome, and I'm sure there are other ways of doing it too, but like, I love that you're coding this thing, and yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Pekko said there about the kind of shitty pieces of paper, that was kind of material number one in a way. I mean, material number two, to be frank, because the discussion and the recordings and, you know, the spaces we were in were material number, I guess, one in that phase of development. And
the materialization happens also in subtle manners, like and looking at it this way, one can see how it takes many forms. Like some of them are very temporary, like even in a way, like speaking about it, like you said, is materialization. But it's also like, when you're thinking about materialization, there's also like qualities of persistence that, okay, this stays in the world, or it's able to distribute itself, which is kind of its way to breed. Is like, okay, there can be many copies of this and they land up on different people, and then that becomes an activity in itself. This for me is a way more, let's say, I mean, sophisticated is an annoying word, but like, let's say a more nuanced way of looking at what memes are looking at, which is simply kind of virality. But it's actually about the kind of like like almost like biological behaviors of meaning in general, and not just virality in itself. But that's a whole nother topic. But I do think like that leads to the pragmatic possibility of asking this question, like now that we're looking at this sort of different materializations also in a more persistent sense, like when a new materialization comes like this, like what we started from, is then the question is, okay, what could we do with this materialization? And I do think that is almost like an enabling question, like looking at it this way. It's not like, is this the publication? The publication. It's a publication potentially,
Absolutely.
but then it's an enabling in the sense that, okay, what is the, in a way, the power, the force, that as almost like a life form, how can it take part in the ecosystem of people, etc., and ecosystem being us and everybody else at the same time, and what can it bring to that ecosystem in itself? And that for me like opens up rather than closes up thinking.
It's a funny way to say ecosystem when we speak about cards, because cards have this kind of hard-edged silhouette. Like they have a material edge. That's the point. That's where the cleft is. And the ecosystem, in a way, I mean, these ecotones, like the kind of transitional zones between them. And you know, we've been using the words terrain and network a lot of times. So the cards would kind of be a little bit more a networky thing, whereas I know this can be dyed, but I just want to kind of maybe pull the contrast slider a little up.
But I don't think there is a contradiction there, because, you know, buildings have hard edges, but they're certainly part of the ecosystem. If you put a building in any place, in a forest or even in a city, it is part of the ecosystem in itself, and that's kind of like, actually there is a benefit of having, let's say, architecture in the ecosystem now being all like, but well, could name it many ways, but one way to look at it is kind of the ecosystem of all meaning, and how it constantly churns and moves, and meaning in the largest sense. But like being able to build something in that ecosystem is like putting a building in a forest or anywhere. It's still part of the ecosystem.
I wasn't, sorry,
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to point out the that there would be an opposition or what's the word? A contradiction. I wanted to point out the kind of proximity, or like, let's say, where in the cards we kind of spoke about the cleft being the point, right? That's also, and we were insisting on the cleft being the expression of the shoving apart, right?
Yes.
Detaching from a kind of supposed real world, the concept, and make it clear that it's not, you know, that it's nothing but a kind of framed thing. If we transition to the thought of the ecosystem, that rupture, the direction of the rupture is reversed, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the cleft becomes a compositional. What was a kind of rupturing movement becomes a compositional movement, which is the same quality.
But yeah, I don't think it's contradictory, because in a way, even the most boring of doors has a cleft-like quality, especially if there was a wall before and then you put a door on it. What the door is about is actually kind of like a portalness. It's like it's about like going from one space to other space in itself. And while that's a super mundane version of it, it still has similar qualities. And this is a kind of quality we've seen in play in cards, although also like what they open might be actually generated space. It's not a space that you necessarily know, but you suddenly end up in another space itself.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of like it's still at least a cousin of the door.
Mm. Yeah.
But it's yeah, like for me, like just like ultimately, like all this weirdness of what to call it, like metaphysics. I was thinking, could one write metaphysics with the mu, like micro, like Greek M? What would that mean? Metaphysics? Anyway, I'm now getting too playful on this. But besides all of this esoteric, hermetic, abstract, like I do think there is something very practical here, which is kind of a way of looking, a way of approaching, way of processing these materializations, and how to then look at them as well forces, well effects in and of themselves, um, uh, and that in itself is interesting. And I do think like taking that kind of a look towards the kind of approach you've taken might be a quite refreshing and fertile potentially.
Mm.
I don't know, what do you think?
I have to say that I was just trying to look at Cleft. But yeah, I mean, what I think like came out of this now, and like what I was thinking this a bit earlier is like the so I think I already said this, what I'm kind of a bit dealing or struggling with is this kind of the kind of making a thing under the kind of, you know, observation that it might be, that it might appear to look like the thing. That's one problem. The other thing though is like we've been pouring quite a lot of Schmalz in German, like soul, into the development on this domain. And so maybe what like that same kind of dedication or application of effort might pay off also in other domains. So like even kind of that kind of the investigation. So what just happened?
I think that Zoom crashed. It made
Hello?
a micro crash.
Is this breaking up here?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, I'm having a horrible connection. Am I still being heard at all?
Can you hear me?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can hear only crack.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I think I can hear you, but it was just cracky the whole time.
Yes, because the Zoom crashed.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the essential cause of this. Like, I think it crashed on my end, and because I was hosting the event, and therefore all the hubbub that comes from that, and like, so.
Okay.
Yeah, that just happened. But it luckily didn't cut the whole session, but like still caused a crash. Yes, and I think even the recording is on. Yes, so there's probably a jump there. I think it stopped recording for a while. Okay, so welcome to the world after the crash. You were saying, Martin.
No, what I was saying is that like kind of because so I don't know how much now got recorded, and I don't know if it's necessary to repeat everything or how significant it was, but like that the kind of the further pursue ways of materializing. So including this one, including maybe the a residency mode again, including the what is like a thing online, this or future, including other like scrap paper, you know, versions much larger, like houses as cards. I don't know. Would, you know, could benefit or would likely benefit from the same, like from receiving further commitment, like the whole idea of the cards has certainly progressed by the commitment given to it through the conversations, for example. So this materialization has brought already a lot in terms of recognizing it. And so there, I think, so this was maybe what I wanted to say, that these the pursuits of materialization would not be seen as pursuits of production, but pursuits of inquiry. And so kind of to emphasize the, you know, the reciprocal, multinodally reciprocal endeavor that this all is made up of.
Yeah, agreed. That's kind of direction I was thinking as well. And it's also like every materialization is different in this, but it's precisely giving this sort of enablement towards them.
Yeah.
But to be practical, I would say, given that we have run a lot of time, Jakub, I know your internet is cutting off and on, but since you're now online, we could give a bit to your topic if you're able to speak. If you can hear us.
Now I can't, the last sentence where you asked, I could hear.
Can you hear us, Jakub?
I don't know, Pekka, were you asking something from me? Because I couldn't hear you at all.
But can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So just internet hijinks. But can you also hear me, Jakub? Because I was asking Jakub, because like we're
I can hear you at some. Yes, I can hear you at some points, but I'm not sure because I'm in the train and the Wi-Fi here might be a bit choppy also. So I'm just not sure whether the choppiness is on my side or elsewhere. But I think now I should be able to hear.
We can hear you actually fine, or I can hear at least. So yeah, if you can hear me, I can hear you.
Yeah, I think I can hear you now. Yeah.
So if, like I was saying, like given that we're long tooth in the time, we could give a little bit to your topic, that the art of the art world, and maybe start with just like you introducing what is your kind of interest towards that, or kind of direction you want to approach towards it, and go from there. So that we have a little bit, at least, a potluck, even though this is a good conversation. But now, if we manage to have two topics, then we're at least a potluck. And probably the picture might be too much. Now you're frozen, if you can hear.
I can hear you, Pekka. I don't hear Jakub anymore.
Yeah, the woes of internet connections, especially multiple internet connections being unstable, is always like a hassle. But and I think if Jakub manages to resurface, I'll say to him that not to have the picture, because I think the train can carry the voice, but maybe not now. Okay, we lost Jakub. Yeah, that's the reality of trains. But we can see, like, if he, okay, here he is. Jakub, if you can hear me, maybe it's good to not have the picture, but if you can have the voice.
Just like in a shitty part of the ride where the Wi-Fi is not strong, but can you still hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you. So maybe not have the picture, but like if you just introduce this topic from the angle you want to, that might be good. Can you hear me, Jakub? Can you hear me, Martin?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, just to make sure it's not my connection, it's Jakub connection that is currently lacking.
Yeah, it does appear so.
Yeah, it's always with trains, like the yeah, you're muted currently. Like Jakub, if you can hear, I'm reading your recent messages. Yeah, this is the annoying thing about trains is the constant danger of connections dropping and coming back and dropping again. I'll put a message. Okay. Okay, even now. All right. So let's give the headphone resetting a moment, and then we'll see what happens. What are our possibilities? Okay, that's discouraging. Like, yeah, it's always this. Yeah, it's funny how like this sort of like fragility always increases chaos in terms of communication, like, because it's too bad. Like, because it would be good to have this at least a short conversation since he's writing about it, and also just for the sake of maybe as a short kind of an interlude to be possibly stopped at any moment if Jakub manages to come back, is to kind of reflections on the game. The one thing I could summarize in connection with this materialization and the talk just before is so I've become more and more interested, and it seems to be kind of bearing out in some of the kind of further testing practice, is that there is this weird architecturality, like, like it like it was present definitely in the playtests, like this possibility of like you frame something, but then like that frame space is able to contour another frames, like
Hello?
hello. Okay, so yeah, it's can you hear me?
I can't hear.
Can you hear me now?
Too bad.
Can you hear me now? it's probably rebooting the connection, but I'll keep on talking in terms of potentially being heard and testing the mic. Can you hear me now?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Oh, it's not really happening, huh, Pekka?
I
mean, now I could hear you that you're at least asking that.
Can you hear me now? Like in terms of continuity? And also, Jakob,
No,
can you hear me?
it's not working. No, it's not working. Can you hear me just normally?
Yes,
just
I can.
easy,
I can. I'll put a comment.
No, it's not happening. I will restart.
Yep. I can hear you. It's probably. Meanwhile, can you hear me, Jakob? And Martin, can you hear me?
Yeah, so now maybe it's a new thing.
Yeah, it might also be bugs in Zoom, really, or like combination of multiple unstable internet connections with bugs in Zoom, because I also had a second Zoom crash and reboot.
Now here it says that your network bandwidth is low. That's what it says here.
Yeah, it's actually saying the same for me, which is or was saying that it's not anymore. And that in itself might be there's also problems if there is like multiple networks that have low bandwidth. This is always the bane of video conferences. It's like because it starts to lose packages from multiple ends. So yeah, that's the. But Jakob, can you hear? You here? Okay, you're muted currently, Jakob. Okay, so now we lost Jakob's headphones in addition. Okay. I think we're arriving to
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you talk a bit like
Yeah, I think my headphones have just died or something.
Yeah, there's a lot of background noise, but I can sort of hear you. There's a little bit bussiness, but I can make out.
Okay. So I think it should work. It could work this way without the headphones, actually.
Yeah, there is.
If you still have a few minutes left.
Yeah. Like maybe you introduce the topic. If you can somehow get away from the background noise, that's good. But if you can't, just introduce it.
Yeah, so I can mute.
No, you're muted. But if you want to introduce it, of course, unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm still trying to reboot my headphones in the meantime, but for some reason they just died. So I'll probably just leave it and I'll try this one. So
Yeah.
Just to briefly introduce the context, I guess while hearing the
Yeah, Jakob, you're cutting off now.
I haven't heard since like half a minute now from Jakob.
Yeah, it started cutting off like from the so sentence, and like seems like like it would be yeah, I think that okay, yeah, like
Let's
there's
just
too many technical problems. Maybe one can think about some other avenue towards this, like and figure out something else. But yeah, like currently we're suffering from apparently multiple technical problems, which also might be in addition to bad internets, bugs in the program, bad headphones. They tend to compound. Yeah. So okay. I think we can call it like too bad we didn't get to Jakob's topic. Mm, I was kind of actually aiming to give him the room earlier, but then he dropped. And then there was no reason to give the room because he wasn't there. And like always kind of like the chance kept slipping. So it kept delaying this. But yeah, like I was saying just shortly, this architecture quality towards this, like how when the space is open, how there's possibility to create this architecture, like even a further question, setting up like almost like a sub room or a space inside the space itself, and how does that architecture happen? Like that's a very summary direction, which I think has a lot of potential, because it's kind of looking at this sort of architecture of this kind of meaning or space of meaning, really, um, and that appears through these portals. But that's I'm not meaning open that topic now here because it's a big
No,
topic.
but like we spoke about us now with the rabbit hole and the fake wall, and yeah.
But also, like when you go through the rabbit hole, and this was true in the games, was like there is this like when that space is open, there is a possibility to architecture that space itself, like and that in itself like is an interesting thing in itself, and also like question architectures it differently than a subframe, and there was even this moment when Mikael asked, almost like in the subframe set, he asked a question that was a detail, and that this starts to behave really like an architecture. It's like in a room, certain approach, kind of a thing, and that is highly interesting in itself. And I've been kind of exploring it, and it seems to be very fertile area, but that's for later. Are you there, Jakob? Or are you behind the multiple technical difficulties? I think that might be the case. Let's call this the last try, if you can hear me, Jakob. You're currently muted. No, okay, maybe. Okay, that tells the story. Okay, let's call it quits. I also got the internet connection is unstable for myself, so hopefully you can hear me, Martin. Toward in the interest of ending the session.
It's difficult. I can't really. It's funny. I'm even on cable. I'm on wired connection. So
yeah, but it doesn't matter
really
because
weird.
it's a combination of all connections, because that's the syncing problem. That's also why maybe not have the picture now, because it's not your connection. It's has to sync all the connections. And this is,
I know. I mean, I'm just saying, like, this is a better connection than I've ever had. And like, I mean, you're at home. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I don't think this is viable as much as I would love to go further with this.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel very productive, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the whole teleconferencing is the matter of the barrel is just as high as the lowest, whatever the sideboard is, like this classic example. It can hold as much water as the lowest. I don't know what the term is for the sideboard, but that's that old classic pattern. It's this like. So it doesn't really matter how good one person's connection is; they will get depending on the lowest connections. And then the problem is if there's multiple lower connections, it actually gets worse. But anyway, so we're coming to an end on like and well, and if you're there, Jakub, you're still muted. We're kind of probably ending this. We'll have to maybe find another way to approach this topic of the art world.
And maybe just like from my side, anyway, like to be defined in terms of time. And so, Jakub, if you hear anything about this, but if you're on this essay right now and you would like a talk about it, maybe we can have one also outside of our Friday schedule. I don't know, Pekko, if your deadline pile has decreased, has been built down, but yeah, because I also think it's a large thing. So as far as I understood, so maybe it's also good to dedicate a bit of time to it, and more than maybe the 10 minutes that we might now have. Or
I think Jakub's deadline is Saturday, probably evening. So that's his. Okay, yeah. So it's probably his end now. Like, because I can hear you fine, Martin. So I think Jakub's end is cutting off the train connection. So we'll find. So.
Yeah, sorry. Is the Wi-Fi here is really not good?
Yeah, we can now sort of hear you, but it's also like.
Is it?
You're now muted. You ask, is it, and then you.
So can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would just. I mean, the Wi-Fi here. Not good. Is it if it's better now, or what's your
It's cutting off again. Like I can now hear you, but then like the first sentence was lost again. Like yeah, like we can try to think of another possibility. Maybe tomorrow daytime. Yeah.
I mean, if you were up for it, at least for a bit. I mean, if you had a bit of time, perhaps in the morning or before, like earlier in the day, that would be super cool. I could write down some of my the like possible frames, because I guess.
Yeah, I heard that you could write down some of the possible frames and then cut off again, if you hear me. Like, but let's try to communicate through, say, Telegram, and possibly there is a session. I'm probably taking in morning, but maybe daytime-ish, like somewhere in the noonish, early afternoon. I would be available. I don't know about Martin, but we can use Telegram for that because it probably works better than the cut connections now. And just for the sake of it, I will also now stop the recording. I probably should have stopped it earlier, given the whole technical difficulties, but I'll stop it now.